Hi there and welcome back to Speedy Reads of Northern Lights by Phillip Pullman. So, I've got the stopwatch on, 15 minutes. Let's pick up from where we left off. Okay. Shall I let the master know you've arrived, my lord? No harm in that. You might bring me some coffee. Very good, my lord. The butler bowed and hastened out, his demon trotting submissively at his heels. Lyra's uncle moved across to the fire and stretched his arms high above his head, yawning like a lion. He was wearing travelling clothes. Lyra was reminded, as she always was when she saw of him again, how much he frightened her. There was no question now of creeping out unnoticed. She'd have to sit tight and hope. Lord Asriel's demon, a snow leopard, stood behind him. "Are you going to show the projections in here?" she said quietly. "Yes, it'll create less fuss than moving to the lecture theatre. They'll want to see the specimens too. I'll send for the porter in a minute. This is a bad time, Stel Maria. You should rest." He stretched out in one of the armchairs so that Lyra could no longer see his face. Yes, I should also change my clothes. There's probably some ancient etiquette that allows them to fine me a dozen bottles for coming in here dressed improperly. I should sleep for 3 days. The fact remains that there was a knock, and the butler came in with a silver tray bearing a coffee pot and a cup. "Thank you, Wren," said Lord Asriel. "Is that the tokay I can see on the table?" "The master ordered it decanted especially for you, my lord," said the butler. "There are only 3 dozen bottles left of the 98. All good things pass away. Leave the tray here beside me. Oh, ask the porter to send up the 2 cases I left in the lodge, would you?" "Here, my lord." "Yes, here, man. And I shall need a screen and a projecting lantern. Also here, also now." The butler could hardly prevent himself from opening his mouth in surprise, but managed to suppress the question or the protest. "Wren, you're forgetting your place," said Lord Asriel. "Don't question me, just do as I tell you." "Very good, my lord," said the butler. "If I may suggest it, I should perhaps let Mr. Corson know what you're planning, my lord, or else he'll be somewhat taken aback, if you see what I mean." "Yes, tell him then." Mr. Corson was the steward. There was an old and well-established rivalry between him and the butler. The steward was the superior, but the butler had more opportunities to ingratiate himself with the scholars, and he made full use of them. He would be delighted to have this chance of showing the steward that he knew more about what was going on in the retiring room. He bowed and left. Lyra watched as her uncle poured a cup of coffee, drained it at once, and poured another before sipping more slowly. She was agog. Cases of specimens, a projecting lantern. What did he have to show the scholars that was so urgent and important? Then Lord Asriel stood up and turned away from the fire. She saw him fully and marvelled at the contrast he made with the plump butler, the stooped and languid scholars. Lord Asriel was a tall man with powerful shoulders and a fierce dark face, and eyes that seemed to flash and glitter with savage laughter. It was a face to be dominated by or to fight. Never a face to patronise or pity. All his movements were large and perfectly balanced, like those of a wild animal, and when he appeared in a room like this, he seemed a wild animal held in a cage far too small for it. At the moment, his expression was distant and preoccupied. His demon came close and leant her head on his waist, and he looked down at her unfathomably before turning away and walking to the table. Lyra suddenly felt her stomach lurch. For Lord Asriel had taken the stopper from the decanter of tokay and was pouring a glass. "No!" The quiet cry came before she could hold it back. Lord Asriel heard and turned at once. "Who's there?" She couldn't help herself. She tumbled out of the wardrobe and scrambled up to snatch the glass from his hand. The wine flew out, splashing on the edge of the table and the carpet, and then the glass fell and smashed. He seized her wrist and twisted hard. "Lyra, what the hell are you doing here? Let go of me and I'll tell you. I'll break your arm first. How dare you come in here? I've just saved your life." They were still for a moment. The girl twisted in pain but grimacing. To prevent herself from crying out louder, the man bent over her, frowning like thunder. "What did you say?" he said more quietly. "That wine is poisoned," she muttered between clenched teeth. "I saw the master put some powder in it." He let go. She sank to the floor and Pan fluttered anxiously to her shoulder. Her uncle looked down with a restrained fury, and she didn't dare meet his eyes. "I came in just to see what the room was like," she said. "I know I shouldn't have, but I was going to go out before anyone came in, except that I heard the master coming and got trapped. The wardrobe was the only place to hide, and I saw him put the powder in the wine. If I hadn't, there was a knock at the door. That'll be the porter, said Lord Asriel. Back in the wardrobe. If I hear the slightest noise, I'll make you wish you were dead. She darted back there at once, and no sooner had she pulled the door shut than Lord Asriel called, "Come in!" As he'd said, it was the porter. "In here, my lord." Lyra saw the old man standing doubtfully in the doorway, and behind him the corner of a large wooden box. "That's right, Shooter," said Lord Asriel. "Bring them both in and put them down by the table." Lyra relaxed a little and allowed herself to feel the pain in her shoulder and wrist. It might have been enough to make her cry, if she was not the sort of girl who cried. Instead, she gritted her teeth and moved the arm gently until it felt looser. Then came a crash of glass and the glug of spilled liquid. "Damn you, Shooter, you careless old fool! Look what you've done!" Lyra could see just. Her uncle had managed to knock the decanter of Tokay off the table and made it look as if the porter had done it. The old man put the box down carefully and began to apologise. "I'm truly sorry, my lord. I must have been closer than I thought. Get something to clear this mess up. Go on before it soaks into the carpet." The porter and his young assistant hurried out. Lord Asriel moved closer to the wardrobe and spoke in an undertone. "Since you're in there, you can make yourself useful. Watch the master closely when he comes in. If you tell me something interesting about him, I'll keep you from getting further into trouble you're already in. Understand?" "Yes, uncle." "Make a noise in there and I won't help you. You're on your own." He moved away and stood with his back to the fire again as the porter came back with a brush and dustpan for the glass, and a bowl and a cloth. "I can only say once again, my lord, I do most earnestly beg your pardon. I don't know what. Just clear up the mess." As the porter began to mop the wine from the carpet, the butler knocked and came in with Lord Asriel's manservant, a man called Thorold. They were carrying between them a heavy case of polished wood and brass handles. Wood with brass handles. They saw what the porter was doing and stopped dead. "Yes, it was the Tokay," said Lord Asriel. "Too bad. Is that the lantern? Set it up by the wardrobe, Thorold, if you would. I'll have the screen up at the other end." Lyra realised that she would be able to see the screen and whatever was on it through the crack in the door, and wondered whether her uncle had arranged it like that for the purpose. Under the noise the manservant made unrolling the stiff linen and setting it up on its frame, she whispered, "See? It was worth coming, wasn't it?" "It might be," Pan said austerely in his tiny moth voice, "and it might not." Lord Asriel stood by the fire sipping the last of the coffee and watching darkly as Thorold opened the case for the projecting lantern and uncapped the lens before checking the oil tank. "There's plenty of oil, my lord," he said. "Shall I send for a technician to operate it?" "No, I'll do it myself, thank you, Thorold. Have they finished dinner yet, Wren?" "Nearly, I think, my lord," replied the butler. "If I understand Mr. Corson aright, the master and his guests won't be disposed to linger once they know you're here. Shall I take the coffee tray?" "Take it and go. Very good, my lord." With a slight bow, the butler took the tray and left Thorold, and Thorold went with him. As soon as the door closed, Lord Asriel looked across the room directly at the wardrobe, and Lyra felt the force of his glance, almost as if it had a physical form, as if it were an arrow or a spear. Then he looked away and spoke softly to his demon. She came to sit calmly at his side, alert and elegant and dangerous, her green eyes surveying the room before turning, like his black ones, to the door from the hall as the handle turned. Lyra couldn't see the door, but she heard an intake of breath as the first man came in. "Master," said Lord Asriel. "Yes, I'm back. Do bring in your guests. I've got something very interesting to show you." That is Chapter 1. Chapter 2, The Idea of North. "Lord Asriel," said the master heavily, and came forward to shake his hand. From her hiding place, Lyra watched the master's eyes, and indeed they flicked towards the table for a second, where the Tokay had been. "Master," said Lord Asriel, "I came too late to disturb your dinner, so I made myself at home in here. Hello, Sub-Rector. Glad to see you're looking so well. Excuse my rough appearance. I've only just landed." "Yes, master, the Tokay's gone. I think you're standing in it. The porter knocked it off the table, but it was my fault." Hello, Chaplain. I read your latest paper with great interest. He moved away with the chaplain, leaving with a clear view of the master's face. It was impassive, but the demon on his shoulder was shuffling her feathers and moving restlessly from foot to foot. Lord Asriel was already dominating the room, and although he was careful to be courteous to the master, in the master's own territory it was clear where the power lay. The scholars greeted the visitor and moved into the room, some sitting around the table, some in armchairs, and soon a buzz of conversation filled the air. Lyra could see that they were powerfully intrigued by the wooden case, the screen, and the lantern. She knew the scholars well, the librarian, the sub-rector, the inquirer, and the rest. They were men who had been around her all her life, taught her, chastised her, consoled her, given her little presents, chased her away from the fruit trees in the garden. They were all she had for a family. They might even have felt like a family if she knew what a family was, though if she did, she'd have been more likely to feel that about the college servants. The scholars had more important things to do than attend to the affections of a half-wild, half-civilized girl left among them by chance. The master lit the spirit lamp under the little silver chafing dish and heated some butter before cutting 6 poppy heads open and tossing them in. Poppy was always served after a feast. It clarified the mind and stimulated the tongue, and made for rich conversation. It was traditional for the master to cook it himself. Under the sizzle of the frying butter and hum of talk, Lyra shifted around to find a more comfortable position for herself. With enormous care, she took one of the robes, a full-length fur, off its hanger and laid it on the floor of the wardrobe. "You should have used a scratchy old one," whispered Pan. "If you get too comfortable, you'll go to sleep." "If I do, it's your job to wake me up," she replied. She sat and listened to the talk. Mighty dull talk it was too. Almost all of it politics, and London politics at that, nothing exciting about Tartars. The smells of frying poppy and smoke leaf drifted pleasantly in through the wardrobe door, and more than once Lyra found herself nodding. But finally she heard someone rap the table. The voices fell silent, and then the master spoke. "Gentlemen," he said, "I feel sure I speak for all of us when I bid Lord Asriel welcome. His visits are rare, but always immensely valuable, and I understand he has something of particular interest to show us here tonight. This is a time of high political tension, as we are all aware. Lord Asriel's presence is required early tomorrow morning in Whitehall, and a train is waiting with steam up, ready to carry him to London as soon as we have finished our conversation here. So we must use our time wisely. When he has finished speaking to us, I imagine there will be some questions. Please keep them brief and to the point. Lord Asriel, would you like to begin?" "Thank you, Master," said Lord Asriel. "To start with, I have a few slides to show you. Sub-Rector, you can see best from here, I think. Perhaps the Master would like to take the chair near the wardrobe." The old sub-rector was nearly blind, so it was courteous to make room for him nearer the screen, and his moving forward meant that the master would be sitting next to the librarian, only a matter of a yard or so from where Lyra was crouched in the wardrobe. As the master settled into the armchair, Lyra heard him murmur, "The devil! He knew about the wine, I'm sure of it." The librarian murmured back, "He's going to ask us for funds. If he forces a vote, if he does that, we must just argue against it, with all the eloquence we have." The lantern began to hiss as Lord Asriel pumped it hard. Lyra moved slightly so that she could see the screen, where a brilliant white circle had begun to glow. Lord Asriel called, "Could someone turn the lamp down?" One of the scholars got up to do that, and the room darkened. Lord Asriel began. "As some of you know, I set out for the north 12 months ago on a diplomatic mission to the King of Lapland. At least that's what I pretended to be doing. In fact, my real aim was to go further north still, right onto the ice, to try and discover what has happened to the Grumman expedition. One of Grumman's last messages to the Academy in Berlin spoke of a certain natural phenomenon only seen in the lands of the north. I was determined to investigate that as well as find out what I could about Grumman. But the first picture I'm going to show you isn't directly about either of those things." And he put the first slide into the frame and slid it behind the lens. A circular photogram in sharp black and white appeared on the screen. It had been taken at night under a full moon, and it showed a wooden hut in the middle distance, its walls dark against the snow that surrounded it and lay thickly on the roof. Beside the hut stood an array of philosophical instruments, which looked to Lyra's eye like something from the Ambaric Park on the road to Yarn. Okay, that's me. So, Grumman, the Grumman expedition. Very exciting. I'll mark that page. And I'll see you next time for a speedy read. Alright? Cheerio for now. Bye.
Stand up and fight, for you know we are right. We must strike at the lies that are spread like disease through our minds. Soon we'll have power.